Hello and welcome back to Information Technology Fundamentals. This lecture is going to cover using file systems. It will concentrate mainly on the Windows file system, but most Linux and Mac also follow some of the same standards. If you understand how to manage, create, open, move, copy, and delete files and folders in Windows, you can apply those skills directly into Linux and Mac. We'll also look at how to use search tools in Windows and how to find a lost file quickly. Let's begin by looking at the file system on our drives. Our physical disks or drives can be divided into multiple logical partitions. In other words, we can have one physical drive and the computer can view that as two totally separate storage areas, and it will treat them independently, and this is used frequently for a few different things, but on laptops, you'll frequently see the hard drive divided, and the one of the logical partitions will contain the installation system files needed to reinstall Windows. It used to be you'd get a CD. Now they partition the hard drive and stick those files in one of the partitions. We can manage those partitions, computer management, and into the storage system, and we can see those there. We have to have at least one partition on our drive. In this, on this slide, we're looking at the navigation pane from the File Explorer. And on here, you can see the different logical drives. We've got C:, D:, F:. Although they look like they're individual drives, we have no way to know if those are physically different drives or just part of one physical drive. To the computer, it's 3 drives. It could be just one drive in the physical sense. The letters A and B for logical drives are reserved for floppy drives. C is reserved for the Windows boot drive. And then every letter after that could be anything from a flash drive, optical drive. It can be reassigned as needed. A file system provides a way of separating data on the drive into individual pieces, which are files and folders. It also provides the way to store the data. It gives the gives file names, permissions, and attributes to the files and folders. It also indexes or lists the files on the drive in which they're located, so the operating system can see what's on the drive in one place rather than combing through the entire drive. Windows, Macs, and Linux all use different types of file systems. One thing they all have in common is they all can read FAT, which is what you would find on a flash drive. So FAT stands for File Allocation Table. There are 3 varieties: FAT, FAT32, and exFAT. Windows uses NTFS, which stands for the New Technology File System, and Windows must use that. Has to use that. It gives the security, compression, encryption that is needed for a Windows system. Optical drives use something called a UDF, or Universal Disk Format, and Linux uses ext3 and ext4, and Macs originally started with the HFS system, although that has recently, in the last 2 years, been replaced with the Apple file system. File systems have features, and in this table you can see how they relate to one another. We'll typically look at compression, encryption, permissions, journaling, limitations, and importantly is naming rules. As you can see at the bottom, each of the different file systems have reserved characters that can't be used when naming a file or folder. So folders or directories are used to group and organize the files. It's mostly for us humans because the computer could put things anywhere on there, anywhere on the hard drive, and find them. But when we as humans go to look through our file system, we like to find things in one location. The second purpose of folders is to group things together that have certain security privileges. We can then apply a security setting to a folder, which will then ensure that all the files in that folder have the same security privileges. So this allows us to separate sensitive information from non-sensitive information. When we talk about a folder, we start with the root folder, which is the base, and everything after that is going to be a file path. So in the example on the screen, we see C:\\, which is the root directory. That's what the backslash stands for. The next one is C:\\Windows. So now we're in the Windows directory, which is in the root directory. In the third example, they've now added System32. So the System32 folder is contained inside the Windows folder, which is contained inside the root folder. Windows has some system folders that are have to be there. They contain specialized programs for starting the computer and where all the settings are. It's typically known as the System32 folder, although there's other ones as well. If any of these folders are changed or modified, it could cause the computer to not run. Program files, of course, would typically be all put together in one folder as well, and users' data would be in another folder system. Linux, on the other hand, doesn't use the term folder. It calls everything a directory. And the root folder and delimiter for that is a slash. Drives are dealt with differently as each storage device becomes what they call mounted within the root file system. So for Linux, it treats almost everything, whether it is a drive, a file, or a folder, in the same way, and it's all contained within the root file system. In this screen, we're looking at the Windows File Explorer, in particular the navigation pane that appears on the left side. In here, you can see there's a few different features. We've got quick access, OneDrive, which is the cloud account for Microsoft Windows users. We can see this PC, which contains everything on the PC. We're going to have a network tab, and we'll also see something called libraries, which would be the documents folder in this case. The quick access is an area that we can customize. So some folder that we go to often, we can create a shortcut in that area and make it quite a bit faster to get there. Each user on a computer has a profile. The user, and in that we have the user system folder. Each user's profile is private and can only be accessed by that user or the administrator of the computer. Each of the profile folders will have several subfolders. There are some default libraries, music, pictures, video, documents that will be set up initially. A Windows computer will also have a public profile, so anything that we put in the public folders, all the users on the computer can access. In Windows 10, they added libraries which are used to provide easy access to different kinds of documents that may be stored in different places. It's a way to keep all of your similar file types together. There are multiple different ways to create a user-created folder. You can use the graphical user interface. So if you're in the File Explorer, you can use the menu at the top or use a right-click, choose New and Folder. If you wanted to use the command line, you can simply type mkdir, and it'll go ahead and create you have to give it a name. Of course, in Windows, we have a series of disallowed characters, which you can see on the screen. And importantly, the full path, which means all the directories and the file name and the extension, cannot exceed 260 characters in Windows. Windows folders and file names are case aware but not case sensitive. So that means if I wanted to go to Windows, if I typed a lowercase w to go to that folder, it would find it even though the Windows folder is capitalized. When we talk about Linux, Linux is case sensitive for everything, so it would not find the folder if we substituted a lowercase for an uppercase. So files are the individual items that are contained inside the folder. Typically, we have two types, binary files and text files. Binary files would just look like ones and zeros, and text files would be what we find for our documents and other applications. So in Windows, each of the files that we save has an extension. That extension is telling Windows what type of file it is. So we would have, for example, document.txt, which would tell Windows that that file is a text file. Applications are associated with the different file types. Frequently, that can cause some trouble if a file association is incorrect. So if for some reason the computer thought .pdf was associated with Microsoft Excel, you could potentially have some problems opening files when that happens. So when we save files, we use either the save or save as command. Save really means to update a file. Save as is going to create a new file with a new name. We can do that with a right click and new in this example, or if we want to open it, we can double click on a file or folder and that will activate it, or in the case of a folder, go into it. Folders have options that we can apply to them, and we can get to that through instant search. You can do file explorer options, and you'll find the folders options dialog box. And in here you can see there are a number of different check marks we can put on here, from how it handles thumbnails. Importantly, one of the features is whether we show or hide hidden files or folders. You can tell a folder or a file to be hidden in Windows. Those are usually done with system files and folders that we don't want to have inadvertently changed. However, if you're working on a computer, you may need to see those, so you can go in here and activate the show hidden files and folders from here. In Windows, we can rename any file or folder using the rules. When we do that, it's just a right click and rename, and we can change the file name. However, we can't, when we copy files, we have to be careful. If we copy from one directory to another, if there is a file that has the same name, we're going to have a conflict, and you'll get this dialog box, and you'll have to decide, do I want to replace it, change the name, skip it? What am I going to do? So Windows tries to keep you from inadvertently overwriting files and folders. If we want to delete a file or folder, it's really just a right click and delete, or press the delete key after it's selected. All files and folders go into the recycle bin. So we have another chance to bring them back if we accidentally erase something we didn't want to. If we select a file and folder and hold the Shift key and press delete, it bypasses the recycle bin and is basically gone forever. If we plug in a flash drive and delete a file or folder off of that, that also does not go into the recycle bin. If we want to select multiple files and folders together, we can do that. If they're adjacent to each other, we can drag or use the shift and click method to select multiple folders that are adjacent to each other. If the files or folders we want to select are not adjacent to each other, we can use the control key and the mouse click to select individual items that are non-adjacent. If we want to just use the keyboard, we can use the shift and arrow to select adjacent items, and non-adjacent items can be selected using control arrow and space bar. All files are going to have the ability to have some attributes. In Windows, we have the read only, which just prevents something from being overwritten. Hidden files, which we've talked about. System files, which identify those files that should not be accessible to users and should not be changed. And archive, which is an attribute used to the computer uses to decide whether or not something should be backed up or has been backed up. When we want to look at these different types of attributes, we can right-click on a file and open the File Properties dialog box, as you see here. And there on the lower part of the screen, you'll see that it says Attributes, and you can see in this case, the Read-Only attribute is applied to it. Folders also have files and permissions for sharing. Those are also found in the Document Properties box. And on this case, we're looking at the Security tab, and you can see that the system user has full control. We can, on the top part, designate a group or a user, and then on the bottom part of this, decide what controls we want to give to the folder or document in question. We could give it full control, modify, read, list, or execute, which is just for folders, or write. If we need to find a file or a folder on the computer, the fastest way usually is using the instant search, which is down at the bottom next to the start menu. And I could just type something in the type here to search box, or I could hit the microphone and go ahead and speak a search file. It'll look through the whole computer and it will look for files, programs, messages. And if it finds very little about what it's looking for, it'll actually reach out to the web. You can decide whether or not you want to use Cortana, which is the voice search. You can turn that on and off through the control panel. Once we open the File Explorer, in the upper right-hand corner, it also has a search box. So in this case, you can see that the term security was used, and it looked through everything in the Documents folder that has the word security either in the title or in the text of the document. We can narrow that search down further by using the controls in the menu bar here by telling it what kind of file we're looking for, the size, and perhaps the date. After we have got a large group of search items, we can also use the sort and grouping to help us narrow it down. In this case, you can see that security brought a large number of possibilities. We could then start grouping them by perhaps file type or other types to help locate what we're looking for. All files in Windows have an extension which designates the file type. Windows will look at that extension to decide what program should be associated and open to use it. Some common ones here are TXT, RTF, ODF, DOC, and DOCX, which refer to word processing. Likely it would be if you had Word on your file or on your computer, it would likely associate with that. Spreadsheet, Excel, SX, PowerPoint, PPTX, and of course the ever popular PDF, which would open your PDF viewer. Image files come in many different formats. JPEG, so JPG or JPEG, is a commonly used image type, but you also have GIF, TIFF, PNG, and BMP are used frequently as well. And these all may be associated with your video or your digital photo imaging software. Video comes in several different file types as well. MP4 is the most common. It supports a large variety of audio and video formats. MPG is an older extension. FLV also, which is for flash video, which should be largely dead. And then we have WMV and AVI, which are also older formats, not used that much anymore. Audio also comes in a huge amount of different file types. MP3 is one most people are familiar with. It is gives us the smallest audio files, but if we want to have high-end audio, we have to go to some of these other types of audio file types. Executable files or for applications or software are going to end in .exe or MSI. Extension BAT, CMD, VBS, JS, and PS1 are all scripting languages that are supported by Windows OS. There are a number of different compression formats. One of the ways we try to save room in storage and transfer is by compressing our files to make them smaller. So here is a list of typical compression formats you'll find on a computer. Windows natively supports zip. Some of these other ones like tar, rar, 7z, and gz in a Windows computer may require you to download another file in order to uncompress or unzip the files. So as a quick review, we described the properties of a file system and notice that we, depending on our hardware and our OS, depending on our hardware and our OS, we have to determine the correct file system for that system. We looked at how to use a file manager to create, open, move, and copy and delete files and folders. And lastly, we looked at some different search tools and options to locate files on a computer quickly.